What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and the Living Tribunal was spotted in the TV spot for Doctor Strange 2, which has everybody excited and is the talk of the town, right? We finally, at least they're teasing the appearance of the Tribunal. We don't know if it'll actually appear in any meaningful way, if we'll just get like a quick glimpse of it, and that'll basically be it. In all honesty, given how Doctor Strange 2 looks like it's going to unfold, it would be a perfect chance to actually have the Tribunal step in to basically whisk Doctor Strange and Wanda to like the Far Shore or the Dimension of Manifestations or something like that, which we'll talk about here in a minute, and basically put them on trial, right? And just be like, stop what you're doing, or I'm going to obliterate all of you, your Earth and your universe, which it could do. There'd be a great time to do that. But let's kind of wind the clock back a little bit. Let's take a few steps back and answer the burning questions that pretty much all of you have. What's the Living Tribunal? What's its purpose? And how powerful is it? Okay, so here's the thing. If you guys are looking for like a power hierarchy among all the cosmic entities and really everybody who exists in Marvel Comics, I have that over at Comics Explained. You'll find a link in the description. You can check that out after this video. But in terms of the Living Tribunal, let's kind of focus on its powers first. So traditional or really conventional wisdom says the Living Tribunal is this infinitely powerful being. And that's true, but not necessarily. For years and years and years, that was the case, right? For decades in Marvel Comics, the Living Tribunal was second only to the One Above All. And with a few exceptions, like the Molecule Man Owen Reese at his peak, the original Beyonder from Secret Wars in 1984 at its peak, that precious few people were more powerful than the Living Tribunal. Now, all this changed in the aftermath of Secret Wars in 2015. One, because the Living Tribunal was killed by the Beyonders, meaning there was no more Living Tribunal. That was followed up with a story by Jim Starlin called Infinity Revelations, which basically had Adam Warlock from an alternate reality become the new Living Tribunal. Following that, you go into a comic called The Ultimates by a guy named Al Ewing. This team was nuts. They were ridiculously overpowered, right? It was Blue Marvel, Adam Brashear, who has yet to appear in the MCU, and we absolutely need him. Black Panther, America Chavez, Carol Danvers, Monica Rambeau, Spectrum. I mean, these are all for the most part characters who exist in the MCU in some capacity or have existed outside of Black Panther, who of course Chadwick Boseman passed away, and Blue Marvel, who we haven't seen yet. So like, the stage is basically set for like the ultimate Avengers, right? So it's only a matter of time, fingers crossed, before we get them. But during Al Ewing's Ultimates, what you got was basically the Living Tribunal appearing and essentially him establishing that the Living Tribunal's power is relative to the size and scope of the multiverse. Because the multiverse was still relatively new at the time, the Living Tribunal was not at its absolute peak of power. That's why the cosmic entities Master Order and Lord Chaos were able to merge into a singular being and then destroy the Living Tribunal, because it was not at its peak of power. If it was at its peak of power, it would have been able to withstand that onslaught and then would have annihilated or recreated Master Order and Lord Chaos. That would have basically been it. But the long story short is that the Living Tribunal is in effect the long arm of the One Above All. That the One Above All is basically God in the entirety of Marvel Comics, that nothing is more powerful than the One Above All, and that the Living Tribunal exists to ensure the will and the laws that have been laid down by the One Above All. So that goes into its purpose. So originally in Marvel Comics, when the Living Tribunal first appeared, it was an old Doctor Strange story from, Strange Tales, issue number 157, I think. Not gonna swear to that, I could be wrong. But basically, this being named Zom had shown up. Now, for perspective here, Zom is way beyond anybody in terms of magical power, right? Chthon, Sidorak, Doctor Strange at his peak, the Ancient One, it doesn't matter. They all fall before the power of Zom. And in fact, he was so powerful, the Living Tribunal was the only one who could defeat him and actually lock him away. So that dude's on a whole different level. If Zom's ever brought into the MCU and it's his Marvel comic counterpart, that's how you know the MCU is basically setting up to start winding down, right? To literally start ending things. Him or the Beyonders or whatever, those guys are just on a wholly different level of power. But regardless, during this story, the Living Tribunal initially established its role by telling Stephen Strange that its job was to basically ensure there was a balance of good and evil in every single universe, and that Earth itself was a more evil place than it was good, and so it was going to destroy the Earth. Ultimately, Doctor Strange proved that the Earth actually has the potential for good, so the Living Tribunal backed off and walked away. Now, years later, that would change, and the reality here is that the best description of the Living Tribunal's purpose and role in Marvel Comics came during the original Infinity Gauntlet story, when you basically had Thanos who gained the Infinity Gauntlet, and you got the Cosmic Congress. And so it was basically the cosmic entities of the main Marvel universe: Eternity, Infinity, Master Order, Lord Chaos, Sire Hate, Mistress Love, all those guys. They basically came together and they asked the Living Tribunal to step in. And the Living Tribunal, his response was basically, no, that's not going to happen. That Thanos has the Infinity Gauntlet, but the Infinity Stones are not outside of this universe. They are from the universe itself. Thanos has simply attained a tool that was made available to him or to anybody in the universe. Therefore, Thanos with the Infinity Gauntlet does not violate any kind of multiversal law. Furthermore, if you, Eternity, are not powerful enough to keep yourself alive in the face of Thanos wielding the Infinity Gauntlet, then the weak make way for the strong. Sorry about your luck, and then he basically took off. Now, that goes into the second part of the Living Tribunal's role, which really over the years has kind of turned into basically managing and safeguarding the mystical balances of the multiverse. So in effect, in every one universe, assuming the Marvel Cinematic Universe is like this, you can't have two Doctor Stranges in the same universe. That would be a mystical imbalance. You can't have two Sorcerer Supremes like that. It's why the Ancient One had to die, and then Stephen Strange became the new Sorcerer Supreme. It's why during the events of Spider-Man No Way Home, presumably, Wong became the new Sorcerer Supreme in the absence of Stephen Strange, and then when Stephen Strange had basically returned after the five-year jump when he was dusted, that it wasn't Wong and Stephen Strange who were sharing the title of the Sorcerer Supreme, that it was Wong who maintained that role. But that's one of the issues that you run into at the Living Tribunal, is a lot of times its intervention is arbitrary, it's random, that there are times when the Living Tribunal should step in, but because of how the writer in Marvel Comics is telling the story, the Living Tribunal doesn't, and it's really inconsistent in that way. Having said that, as far as the MCU is concerned, the Living Tribunal potentially appearing here brings in a whole host of different things. The Far Shore, the Dimension of Manifestations, all that kind of stuff. Now, we probably won't see all of that, certainly not in Doctor Strange 2, but I would go as far as to say that if the Living Tribunal does appear and it has any measure of a meaningful role, that it'll basically be putting Doctor Strange and the Scarlet Witch on trial, right? So the idea here is that the Scarlet Witch, at least according to the rumors and everything, is leaving her universe or potentially sending her astral form outside of her universe into other universes in order to find a universe where her kids exist, and then presumably bring her kids into the main Marvel Cinematic Universe and have her kids there. That violates the laws. That the timeline, right, the way in which the universe worked, kind of the idea of the sacred timeline from Loki, that the way it worked is that Wanda basically had a chance to have her kids, that she basically created them during the events of WandaVision. Her kids weren't real, she lost them. That was her role. As much as it sucks, that's the lot that she drew in life. That's part of her plan. And that as a result of that, if she basically deviates from that, violates it, and then goes into the multiverse and starts snatching up other versions of her kids, the tribunal would step in and say, no, that's not what you're supposed to be doing. Now, you could also look at somebody like America Chavez and say, okay, if what we're talking about here are people who are basically flouting the rules of the multiverse by just jumping to different realities and doing things, wouldn't the Living Tribunal stop America Chavez from existing? And the answer is no, because presumably the powers that America Chavez gained is the power to jump from one universe to the next. It's natural. It's just the nature of her abilities. She didn't gain them by stealing the powers of an alternate reality counterpart. She didn't gain them by somehow accessing a source of power that didn't belong to her. That's just the natural power she has, i.e. she's supposed to be able to do that. So there's no reason for the Living Tribunal to step in. But again, like the tribunal, basically, if this were to happen, what you would most likely see here is the tribunal would grab Wanda and it would grab Stephen Strange, and it would basically bring them to either the Far Shore or the Dimension of Manifestations. Now, the way these two things work is the Far Shore is basically beyond all existence. And so there have been precious few people who have actually experienced it, who have been there. Thanos is one of the people who have. The reason why it happened with Thanos is because during Secret Wars in 2015, Thanos was killed by Doctor Doom. The problem with this is Thanos had previously been banished from the realm of Mistress Death. She was the only cosmic, her and Oblivion, I think, were the only cosmic entities to survive the collapse of the multiverse, because if anything dies, it goes to the realm of Mistress Death. Therefore, she represents death. She can't actually die, unless she did during the Cancerverse storyline and Thanos Imperative. But the important thing about this is that she basically survived, but she had banished Thanos from her realm, which meant that when Thanos was quote-unquote killed by Doctor Doom, he was transported to the Far Shore, a place outside of all time and space. The first universe was banished there at one point along the line, and usually what happens is whenever the congressional or the cosmic congress meets, so the cosmic entities of any one universe or what have you, whenever they meet to basically talk with the Living Tribunal, it's at the Far Shore. The other exception to that is the Dimension of Manifestations. So the Dimension of Manifestations was a place that was established in the old Quasar comics from back in 1992. And the idea behind this is that because cosmic entities are abstracts, they don't have a physical form, that cosmic entities can't readily appear with a physical form. So what they do is they go to the Dimension of Manifestations, they meet with a being called Anthropomorpho that gives them a physical body. And that using that physical body, then they reappear in their own universe. Presumably the Living Tribunal is beyond this. I don't really know. It's just the explanation Marvel gives us, right? Just roll with it, right? I mean, does it make perfect sense? No, but it's also comics. Who cares? But that's kind of how these things work. This is a circumstance where the Living Tribunal would most likely appear. That basically it would show up and it would say, no, like, Wanda, you have to stop what you're doing or I will annihilate you. I wouldn't be surprised if that happened, that you would see Wanda almost kind of play out this Adam Warlock role from the events of Infinity War, when Adam Warlock got the Infinity Gauntlet and they tried to take it away and he freaked out and tried to attack everybody and the Living Tribunal just shut down the Infinity Stones. Like, it would be that kind of a thing with Wanda, that she might even try to attack the Living Tribunal, in which case, if the Living Tribunal is feeling some type of way, it would just obliterate her from existence, but in reality, it'll probably just shut her powers off. Same thing with Doctor Strange, that kind of a thing. Again, I don't know if this will happen. That's an awfully big thing to cram into a movie that's only supposed to be about 2 hours long, so I don't necessarily know if that'll be the case. The reality here is, if the Living Tribunal actually appears in Doctor Strange 2, it'll have a brief cameo. It'll have either a really, really small moment that's only a couple minutes long, or we'll simply just see it observing things, and that'll be it, right? We won't really see any intervention with the Living Tribunal, because the truth about this is we don't know what its role and its purpose is. If you follow the Marvel Comics logic, it makes no sense for the Living Tribunal to exist at all, because there have been a multitude of circumstances where the Living Tribunal could have stepped in. Like, literally the entire climax of What If, when Ultron had the Infinity Stones and somehow managed to use the Infinity Stones to, like, travel through different realities and so on and so forth while fighting the Watcher, that would have been a time for the Living Tribunal to step in. Like, the reformation of the multiverse at the end of Loki, it would have made sense for the Living Tribunal to step in then, or at least to appear. So we don't really know what its role is. We don't know what its form and function is. We simply know that presumably it exists because of what we saw in the TV spot for Doctor Strange 2. Either way, I'm excited, man, because I love the Living Tribunal. Oh God, it's so phenomenal. If you guys do want to see the story where the Living Tribunal dies, I'll also have that link in the description as well to Comics Explained, the video series on Jonathan Hickman's Avengers, the New Avengers. Phenomenal story. Make sure you guys check it out. It's absolutely nuts. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end, and I will catch you all later. Peace.